Are you looking for a podcast where you can hear from real people regarding their real dental drama? If so, then you've come to the right place. Join hosts Bethany Petty and Dr. Rena Kuba as we dive into the solutions we've created and the mistakes we've made while managing dental drama. Let's get started.
Hey, friends.
Hey,
so I have a topic I want to talk about today.
Okay.
Before I do, I have a question, not for you.
Okay.
For you, listening. Have you subscribed yet? If you haven't, go. Quit putzing around. May content is out. It is fantastic. We're already working on building up June, so go subscribe. No excuses.
No excuses. I love it. Good reminder.
Move along. Okay, so the topic I want to talk about today is, I don't think we've talked about this before, and satellite locations. I want to talk about, I think a lot of dentists either start off with going, oh, that's the pinnacle of success, is when I have multiple offices. That's what I want to do. My friend did it. So-and-so's doing it. I can do this. Or we're so full, we're busting at the seams, we have no more space to see patients. Clearly, I need to have a satellite location, or I need a bigger office. So do I keep this one and start another one over there, or what do I... So the topic, I guess, and maybe you can help kind of rein it in, but my question is, I think all of us at some point, either somebody has asked us or suggested, or we feel like, oh, my buddy's doing it. Am I behind? Should I have another office? And it's really easy to get caught up in that. And it's like, am I doing it for the right reasons? Or am I getting caught up in what the Joneses are doing and shut up and focus? Like what? So I think that's, I know early on I had a practice, what do you call it, a rep, my rep, Chris at the time, and he said something, and it's always stuck with me, and he was like, people always seem to think you get busier and then, ooh, I can just recreate this in another location. Why do I not do that and get twice the money? And he's like, what they're not realizing is you're getting twice the headache. And can you really give enough attention to both? Or are you going to start giving attention to that one and then this one start dropping because you can't keep up? And so he said, like, really, if you're in the camp of, oh, I'm so busy, he's like, are you maximizing your space 6 days a week? Are you open on Saturdays and you still can't get enough room? Are you utilizing all your operatories, or is it like you're full out of 2 operatories, but you really could build out 3 more and you're not doing that, but yet you're going to go start another location? So that's always stuck with me, because I would say probably around year 4 or 5 when we finally were hitting our stride and our rhythm and all of that. And I remember the staff going, oh, we don't have any more room here. And I was like, normally that would have been easy for me to go, yeah, you're right. No, we're open from 7 to 3.
Yeah.
3 days a week. We have not outgrown our space. We're just not utilizing it to full capacity. When we are here on Saturdays, and we're here from 8 to 5 or longer, with 2 doctors, 3 hygienists, like whatever the space can accommodate, and we're doing that 6 days continuously, consistently, then I'm busting at the seams.
That's right.
But I don't think people think about it that way. They start going, oh, we're busy. Well, you're busy in the confines of what you're doing, but can you stretch those confines? And I think in most cases, the answer to that is no. But you're in your bubble and in your zone and haven't thought about thinking about, alternatives. But then you're also going, oh, a new shopping center opened up in the town next door, or I've heard this town is growing, and look, we've been so successful here, let's do that there. And I think that for me is always, I'm just like, whoa. Because now you really are splitting yourself amongst 2, and how can 2 be equally successful unless you're bringing on a partner or a management team? I don't know, but to me it's like, I don't know about that. So can we talk more about how do you know if you could and should have a satellite location? And for people that are like, well, everybody else is doing it and I'm behind, talking about some of that mentality as well.
Yes. So I think this is such a great topic because I do think you're right. I think there's this, like, this is the evidence that you're successful, that you have more than one location. And I disagree with that sentiment completely. Now, I do think there are cases where a second location makes sense, but I think you'd be surprised to hear me say that there's very few situations that I think actually make sense for a second location. So, because oftentimes I can get in and look and realize there's so many other solutions before we branch into a second lease that we're having to pay for, utilities, lights, equipment for that space, staff for that space. It sounds easy to replicate, like, oh, we've done it here, we could just easily replicate there. That sounds good, but is the team that you have at your existing location, are they all going over to that satellite location? Because replication happens when the same people are executing the same tasks. So if your team is not going with you to that new location, which I would never recommend,
because then you're not in this location anymore,
then you're compromising your
bread and butter base. Yeah,
it's your baby. And now what is fueling the financial pipeline for that second location, you just compromised it. You just cut its legs off and said, I still want you to run as fast. Well, that can't happen because you took out the team that was making that possible. So replication of a practice, which to me, you're like, okay, why would we ever take the team? My assumption is if you're needing a second location, it means that you're fully maxed out. And what you have described is exactly what I would describe. Are we working 5 days a week? Have we lengthened our days? Have we added Saturdays if need be? Are we truly busting?
Have we brought in an associate? Like, what have we done to fully?
Yeah. And so to me, if you're looking at a satellite or a second location, it means you're fully maxed out. So then our team members from that primary location are unavailable to go to the satellite location. So replication is not a possibility at all. If that's in your head, like, oh, I'll just start it the same way I did this one and it'll all work just the same. No. Because you've got completely new team members there who don't know you, who don't know the original system, they can't replicate anything. Replicate what? They have no clue what you're talking about. So you're rebuilding an entirely new practice. And yes, might it turn out to be similar to your original practice, the bread and butter practice? Yeah, it could, years down the road. But the same process that you went through in this original location, the same headaches, the same problems, all of that, it absolutely will happen again at the new location.
The whole ramp up of everything, and not to mention the new locations, because it have its own demographic.
Yeah.
So some of the marketing things that worked in bread and butter may not work in that other one. The same types of customer service type things you might get away with doing or not doing in bread and butter, those may or may not work for this new clientele.
That's right.
So there's a lot of, I think, like little things that it makes it seem. Now, I have a colleague but this has been happening now for years, maybe 7-8 years. When he opened he and a colleague opened 2 locations together, but it was in 2 separate towns, completely far away from each other. And it ended up being, he ran one, colleague ran the other. So I think they eventually split off.
Yeah.
So he was basically running one. Well, I talked to him the other day. He's got 5 locations now, but he's not a practicing dentist anymore.
Right.
He was done with dentistry.
Yeah.
And now he is overseeing. And so that's a whole different
category.
Yeah.
Yep.
But if you yourself are going, no, I'm the provider and all these patients in this town love me and I've built up this great practice and I'm going to go duplicate it over there, something's going to be different. Mm-hmm. So not that it can't be done or shouldn't be done, but I think just the realities of knowing that it's not just as simple as, oh, I'll just open all these other locations and it's the same. No.
Yeah. And as long as a practice owner knows that before they take this leap of faith into a satellite location or a second location, I think we've just got to be careful not to oversimplify the process. As a matter of fact, in order to make sure it's the right decision, I would recommend overcomplicating it and playing out all the horrific what ifs that could happen with a second location. And once you've played through all those horrific what ifs,
such as, because I think the people that are ready to do that and wanting to do that don't. They're just like, oh, this is, we've already been so successful here, we'll just repeat it there. So what are you talking about, like the horrific?
So what if I can't find good staff members for that location? What would I do? How could I recreate a really good practice having subpar employees? So right now my bread and butter works great because I have fantastic team members. They execute everything. But what if I have team members that don't show up? They do show up and they do a terrible job. They're not good at customer service. They leave. So it's just an environment where I haven't built retention with my staff members. And so they're constantly funneling through and I'm having to retrain from the ground up. I don't have a long-standing team member in this new satellite location. So I don't have a good trainer built in. Like, I am the trainer. So what if I'm having to manage a lot of HR headaches? And
I had a colleague that did that with, and I think, of course, I'm never going to know the ins and outs, but he started another location, could never keep a good associate. Frankly, then he couldn't keep an associate in his main one either. And I'm like, oh, so now you're constantly looking for two associates.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if his original plan was get an associate and they help some in one and some in the other, but the towns were pretty far from each other. Like, if you lived near one, it was going to take you a good 45 minutes to get over to the other one. Mm-hmm. And anyway, I think ultimately he ended up having to sell that one.
Yeah.
Or close it down because it just wasn't sustainable, and he tried for multiple years.
It's common. It's a common problem. So what if staffing is a real big headache for me? Another what if is, what if the marketing that I did in my original location doesn't work in the new location and I'm struggling to get patients in the door? I'm struggling to get production on the schedule. Having in your mind a longer negative cycle. What would I do if it actually doesn't become net positive, covering the bills until 2 years down the road? And making sure financially that you've built yourself up enough of a cushion in the original practice that it could continue to feed that satellite practice. So we don't want to go in assuming, oh my gosh, this location's perfect, the culture's just right, I'm going to get in there and I'm going to be net positive in 6 months. Nope. Play out the what if that it's not net positive for a longer period of time. Are you still feeling good about that? And you may say, yes, because I know that the ground is fertile for a practice in that location. So I'm willing to continue to kind of filter off the top out of my original practice for 2 years to pay for that. Okay, so what if I can't get the new patient flow, I can't get the profitability up fast enough? That's a good what if to play out. What if I ultimately find that I can't handle both practices, which is a very real possibility? What if mentally I'm just having trouble managing both the staff at the satellite, the staff at my original, the patient problems that come up between the two? What if it becomes too much for me? Which is a possibility we have to consider. What would you do in that particular case? So the more we can kind of project out worst case scenario and go ahead and come up with preventative solutions to those, then we're going to be more prepared.
And have even thought about those boundaries and kind of go, what would my threshold be? If I'm thinking, okay, can I, support this for 2 years and not have it be profitable, but what is my line? Is it 2 years? Is it 1 year? Like, at what point? And if it gets to that 2 year mark and we're still in that same boat, what am I doing then? Mm-hmm. But if you've kind of gone, well, no, it will be, but then you find yourself like 2 years later and you're like, oh my God, I'm bleeding money now because I wasn't thinking about that boundary of 2 years or 1 year or 6 months or whatever it is. So having had some boundaries in place, I guess, would be the question.
Yeah. And I would say too, as far as projecting worst case scenario, to me, you've got to have somebody that's side by side with you on this. So it doesn't mean that they're moving over. So you might have your office manager that's just like, you can't live without this amazing person. That doesn't mean that your office manager is moving over to the satellite location. That's not what I'm saying. It's just you need somebody to run ideas past, to potentially support you with some of the things that are needed. Like maybe you don't have the capacity to do all the hiring at this satellite location, but thank goodness you've got an office manager that can help you filter through some resumes and conduct some of the initial interviews. So just, I think anytime we're talking about a full-time practice, the original practice is a full-time practice, and that doctor is now choosing a satellite location, even if they've already got a good associate in mind, they may even have some key team members in mind that out in the community that they already know for that location. You're still going to want like your inside person that's kind of helping you with it. In other words, just don't try to do it on your own is what I would say. Have a good buddy that's walking alongside you. It could be your financial planner that they're making themselves more available to you while you make some of these decisions. Just have somebody that you're running ideas past. Now, having said all the negatives to a satellite location, in other words, just think about all the negatives before you decide to do a satellite location. There are times that it really does make sense. I'm coming from a practice that I was just at where his practice really is like we're running out of space. It is a very busy practice. He's got 5 hygienists, himself and an associate doctor. Busy. They're it's open 5 days a week. Both him and the associate doc are just unwilling to do Saturdays, and that's fine.
Real quick, before you keep going with that, the next question would be, is he fee for service?
Yes.
Okay, because that would be my next question. Like, maybe that's the time to stop. Maybe you think you're busy, but you're still taking HMOs. Dude, you are working and not making money. Exactly. So before you go start a satellite location thinking you're busy, like, are you working smart or are you just working? And so at that point, if you think you're busy and you're like, yes, I'm there 5 days a week and we don't want to work this Saturday and we're good, but we still don't, there's still a 2-month wait to get in here. Maybe that's where, make sure to look at your insurances and stuff and say, wait, if we dropped this one insurance that pays nonsense, how many patients am I going to lose? Could that free up the space we need for better paying patients here? So I think that's the other thing to think about.
You absolutely need to consider that before starting a second location. It doesn't make any sense to me. Because if you're doing dentistry for 50% off, which is what you're doing if you're in network, then you need to make sure, could I just lose a few patients and be okay? And also not just on capacity with the actual physical space, but also capacity with your team. Like if you're looking at, I'm in network with everybody and I'm to a point where me and the hygienist just can't handle this patient base any longer. We've got to add an additional hygienist or an additional doctor. Make sure that makes sense financially. So is that new full-time hygienist, do you have enough volume to pay for her and still be net profitable? Or let's say it's an associate that you're bringing in. So even capacity from a staff member standpoint, does it make more sense to drop insurance before adding that new hygienist? Which
I think what a lot of people do, I think, is going, how could it not? How could it not? Like, we're making all this money and we could see more patients and we'll bring in these providers. Like, that seems easy. It's not that simple. You might be paying a doctor top dollar, to come in, but you're not making top dollar.
Right.
You're making 50% or less of your fees by taking this insurance.
Yeah.
So I think that's one where a lot of people don't really put that together.
Yeah.
And you're not doing yourself a service whatsoever. You're actually going to end up in struggling to make profitability.
Yeah. And again, this is where you have to look at capacity through multiple different lenses. At the end of the day, we have a certain number of chairs. We have a certain number of patients. Those certain number of chairs needs to be able to to provide enough capacity for our certain number of patients. And there's going to be multiple times in a practice where you go, these chairs are not enough to service the amount of patients that we have in our practice. And wow, that's a huge blessing. Okay, well, how can we lengthen the chair time? The same number of chairs, but how can we lengthen it? How can we add a day so that now those 4 chairs that we have available are also available on Fridays? And the owner doc is like, I ain't going to be doing that. That's fine. It doesn't have to be you. Who could you put in your practice on a Friday to service your patients and make sure that there's capacity there? So most times there is just untapped capacity solutions that we're just immediately going, based on our current circumstances, we don't have enough chairs to be able to service the patients. Yes, but you can reduce the patient base oftentimes with some very creative solutions, or you can extend those chairs so that they're available more hours in the day or more days out of the week. Or it could be that a doctor, especially in a startup practice, it could be a year or 2 in, they still haven't added a hygienist and they're running out of capacity. They're like, oh gosh, how do I continue to serve? Well, there's a chair that's never used. It's fully equipped and we never get to that 4th room. So you don't need chairs. You actually need providers is what you need. So yes, before you consider I'm at capacity and need a satellite location, make sure that you've actually thought through.
So you were saying this doc that you were with, they've done all of that.
Yeah.
And they're fee for service, meaning it's not like they could drop on insurance. They have. And they still have this volume. What is he doing then? Why? How? Yeah. Tell him to give us the secret.
I know. He's got a fantastic practice. And he has, due to kind of some prevention training that he's gone through, a lot of his patients see him more than every 6 months. In his mind, like a lot of caries, a lot of perio comes from just they're not seeing the dentist enough. And so his hygiene department is very robust. He's got a great practice. So he's in a situation where we've done all that we possibly can, including, which I hardly ever recommend this, but including cutting back on marketing. Because I'm like, we don't need the new patient flow. We can't service the new patients right now because of the space limitations. And so for somebody like that, he's going, okay, does it make more sense to have a second location? Does it make more sense to expand the physical space? Saturdays and Sundays are not an option for him, and that's great. He doesn't want that to be an option for his team because he's got, a lot of working moms on the team and all of that. So there's some boundaries that he's put into place, but he's still in a capacity situation. When you're in that and you've done everything that you can to reduce that capacity problem, then you're looking at a satellite location. And in that case, sometimes a satellite makes sense. Sometimes it doesn't. And you're just like, okay, well, we got to turn that new patient nozzle down to just a trickle, and we're okay with that. And, but even in that situation, he and I talked about a satellite location, and then we really started looking at options within his
current space
to go, can we add, can we extend? Given the layout of his property, that is not a possibility. So we're like, oh, okay, it's got to be satellite. Nope. No, because there's a building next door that he can purchase and either bulldoze that and kind of build out, or he can connect the 2 buildings. So just be creative is what I'm saying. Don't immediately go to second location. Even if you're in a true capacity situation, you may want to look at just what can I do with my current space. So that's one thing. When you truly have a capacity situation, satellite makes sense. But then sometimes there are just opportunities that present itself where, hey, I wasn't even wanting necessarily a second location, but this great opportunity came up in a neighboring town. I know that's an underserved population. It would be really helpful for them to have a dentist in that location. I don't necessarily need it from my patient base here, but it's kind of an exciting possibility.
So I think that happens a lot with people, or they talk themselves into that. And I think the times where I could see where it truly does make sense, or potentially, because I had a colleague that in the next town over, there was like a dentist who like for whatever reason, at like age 70, decided to start a practice and fully equipped it and did all of that, and then never quite took off because he didn't, do all the things he needed to do to build a patient base, whatever, and then was like, oh, never mind, I really don't want to be here. So almost like a flash sale. Like, who wants to take this off my hands? And so this colleague was like, it was too good a deal to pass up.
Yeah.
Like 50, 70, 80 grand that for pretty much new equipment, pretty much whatever, decent lease contracts, though. He did that. I've got a couple of colleagues that actually have done that.
Yeah.
And so what are your thoughts on that? Like, does that... Do you think that's a good idea?
It can be. It can be dependent upon the owning doc's capacity, right? So that's where we still play out all of the what ifs. We go, what if I have staffing problems there? What if it's not profitable fast enough? What if it's too much for me to handle? Do I think I can handle that? So you still have to play through all the negative what ifs and then go, okay, if kind of worst case scenario happened in this second location, and am I still okay with it? Or what can I do to potentially prevent worst case scenario in that location? And I will say, in all my years of dentistry, very seldom is a practice bankrupt for some reason. It tends to be a pretty surefire bet that you're going to be profitable at some point. Sometimes it takes longer, sometimes it's quick, but most of the time you're going to hit a net profitable situation. And so, is a dental practice a good investment? Almost always. It really is. But I think you've got to make sure you're okay with the risk that it may not be net profitable as soon as you want it to be. Or it may take more mental capacity than you were wanting to commit to it. And if you're okay with that, it's going to be profitable for you. It is going to pay off at some point. So in that case, yeah, most of the time it's a good situation depending upon the practice owner's capacity.
So I guess that would be too, like if it is a flash sale type situation, or looking at opportunities that present themselves and suddenly you're like, well, I never thought I was going to do that, but now there's a space available that's already plumbed, and my portion would be $200,000 instead of $600,000 like I had to do originally. And I've got a colleague that I know is moving from out of state and is looking for a place to practice, and we've always gotten along, and we want to, like, things like that. If it looks like you can make that work, but keeping in mind that it's still not a replication exactly, and there is going to be maybe financially it may make sense, but mentally doesn't make sense for you.
Exactly.
And trying to figure out, like, okay, same thing, where are my boundaries on that? Like, if this colleague comes to town, but then they actually don't come to town, it turns out that they are in a suburb somewhere far away, and okay, now does that mean I've got to work out of that location, or do I, oh gosh, like, what's my plan? Okay, well, maybe that location's only open 2 days a week. Well, that kind of sucks, because that's going to take me 3 years to make my money back rather than the 18 months I thought it was going to take. But okay, so same kind of concept, but those are times where it might make sense.
To me, those are oftentimes the cases where they do make sense. I love when a practice owner can be presented with an opportunity where they can get in and essentially do a startup for a majorly discounted price. If it's already equipped and you're talking about $60,000, $80,000, I'm like, do it. There's very seldom times that doesn't make sense. Or even it's a finished out space, but there's no equipment in it. And so now you're having to look at maybe a $200,000 investment. And I'm still like, do it. because a startup at a $600,000 or $700,000 initial investment from the ground up, a true startup, they're still profitable. They reach a point where they're profitable. So then you look at an $80,000 investment, and I'm like, you're going to be profitable so much faster.
True, but I still do think not to take away from the mental. Because one of the colleagues that did that and took over a practice, and was like, oh, this is great. Oh, I might look for this in other towns too, to see like what else is, somebody's got to be vacating, and I'll just keep my ears to the ground and be ready to pounce on that. Ultimately, what ended up happening with him is his main practice that was fantastic, he eventually ended up selling to corporate. And I'm like, okay, but in his eyes, he's very successful, because now look, I've got 2 offices, and the flash sale one that I got for $60,000 and had all this new equipment, and I didn't have to put much in. No, but it was so much on you mentally. You needed help.
Yeah, that's such a good point.
Was that really a good investment? So it depends on how you look at it.
Yeah.
But I just think thinking through all of those things.
Yeah.
Because it's very tempting a lot of times for all of the reasons we just talked about above. And I guess my point is, go back to your why.
Yeah.
Was your why because you think of that as a measure of success, but is it truly a measure of success if you're making minimal profits out of both when you could be making maximum profits out of one? Are you a husband and wife pair? Are you a sibling pair? Like, maybe that makes sense in those cases where both of you are dentists and you need more space, but I would say it's tempting. It can work. It is smart in some cases, but I think just looking through all of those things before you jump on that bandwagon.
Yeah. And I would say too, you're going to have to approach it from the standpoint of you will need more administrative time. It is for a practice owner to be able to manage 2 locations and still be practicing dentistry 5 days a week. That is next to impossible.
So I think that's where the colleague of mine that now has 5, that's what he's doing. He's not being a dentist. He's 100% administration. And the other one that sold to corporate did so because he wanted the back help, like the administrative help.
Yeah.
Which I'm like, okay, but at what cost now? So yes, you think this $80,000 one was a great deal, but you sold half your practice to get the admin help you needed to run both. So again, there's different ways to do it, but just making sure you're thinking it through.
Yes.
Without blinders on, or just going in and going, oh, well, my buddy in Kentucky did it. I should be able to do it. I've got better grades than him in dental school. Like, look at him. Like, don't fall for that foolery.
There's no clout in owning. I know we think that, like, oh, they must be really successful. They own 2, or they own 3, or they own 5. But to me, it is just as valuable to have a very successful 1 location practice. And that is something to be proud of. You don't have to have multiple locations to show that you're successful. And then I would also say, when you think about starting to divide yourself out, that means less clinical time at your original bread and butter practice. And the last thing you want to do is to compromise the success of that. That was your flagship place, And so if you don't have the mind that can be equally still as committed and fervent at your original location, if you're like, ooh, sparkly, shiny, I've got this new thing now that I'm focused on, and now I'm not focusing at all on my original location, or I'm very unavailable or divided there, it's going to impact even if it doesn't impact your production because you put a phenomenal associate there in your place, it's going to impact that culture that you created, and your team might start to feel different. Your team might start to feel less loyalty to you because they're not with you as much. So there can be negative side effects if you're not able to stay just as firmly committed and available to your team as you were before the 2 locations. So it really does take some careful planning of how you're going to do both well.
Thanks for joining the conversation today. We hope that you are comforted in knowing that you are not alone, but we also hope that you're walking away with some really great tips and tricks to try in your practice. We value your feedback, so please take a few moments to rate and review the podcast. Finally, we want to make sure that we're covering the topics that matter to you. So track us down on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and let us know what topics you want us to cover. As always, please know that we are rooting for you today as you manage your dental drama.